Generous. That is the theme for the next few weeks as we talk about how generosity is so much a part of who we are as the church. As this church in particular, that we are generous with one another, that we're generous with the community, that generosity is part of our identity. It's one of our values. It's something we seek to do in everything that we express. It's what motivates us. So for the next few weeks, we're going to be exploring a different aspect of generosity. Generosity of time, talents, and resources. Question for you as we begin: what is the most valuable thing that you possess? What comes to mind when you think about that question? Is it time? Is time something that came to your mind? Because I have to confess, it wasn't when I asked myself that question in preparation for this sermon. I didn't automatically think of time, but arguably time is the most valuable thing that we have. Time is valuable. To put it into perspective, we can think about it in light of this proverb. Maybe you've heard this before. To realize the value of a year, ask a student who failed a grade. To realize the value of a month, ask a mother who gave birth to a premature baby. To realize the value of a week, ask the editor of an online magazine who is facing a publication deadline. To realize the value of an hour, ask the couple who is in a long-distance relationship who are waiting to meet. To realize the value of a minute, ask the person who just missed the train. To realize the value of a second, ask the person who avoided being in a car accident. To realize the value of a millisecond, ask the athlete who won the silver medal at the Olympics. Time is valuable. Or to quote Benjamin Franklin, time is money. I want you to imagine for a second that every night at midnight, once you go to sleep and you wake up the next morning, you have in your bank account $86,400. There's only one catch. All of that money needs to be spent by the following midnight, or else it goes away. Now, likely, we're going to spend all of that money. We're not going to leave any of it in the bank because it's just going to go away. The same is true with our time in each day. Each day consists of 86,400 seconds. How do you use the time you have in each day? You could actually ask the question, how do we as Americans spend our time? There is a survey done periodically called the American Time Use Survey. Did you know this existed? I didn't. And it tracks how we in this country spend our time. And there are three things that we spend the most time doing. What I'd like you to do is turn to someone next to you, beside you, around you. Try to name some of those three things, what they might be. What might they be? Top three things we spend our time doing. All right, time's up. It's about time to get back to the sermon. All right, top three things. Here you go. The survey says the number one thing we spend our time on is work. Did anyone get that one? The second thing we spend the most time on is sleep. Did someone say sleep? Probably a few of you. And then the third thing we spend most of our time on is watching television. Did anyone get that one? Now here's what I find interesting. Over the last 15 years, The time that we spend doing each of those three things has increased. We're only doing more of those things, spending more time on each of those things. Which leads me to the question, what aren't we doing? Or what are we doing less of? Time at different points in our lives can feel like it's moving quickly. And at other points in our lives, it can feel like time is really standing still. Time is quickly moving by as we look at the days and the months and the years, and yet when it comes to our hopes and dreams, it feels like you're stuck. Time is stuck. To a child, things are taking forever. Time is moving so slowly, it's going to be forever before I'm older and I get to go do that thing I want to do. And when we are older, time moves very quickly, and it feels like just yesterday we were at that place with that person, and it feels like it was just a day ago. So I have some good news and some bad news about time. What do you want first? I'll give you the bad news. The bad news is time flies, and you can't do anything about it. But the good news is that you are the pilot. You are the captain of the clock. I thought of that between the last service, okay? You manage your own time, the time that God blesses you with in this life and in each day. You are the steward or the manager of your time. So how will you spend it? Will you spend it generously, giving freely of your time as a gift? Or will you let time pass without making the most of it? We're going to look at time. We're going to think about time through the perspective of the scriptures today. Beginning in Psalm 90, we're going to look at what the psalmist has to say about how we can make the most of our time. Psalm 90 is, as we read in the inscription, a prayer of Moses in the way that he thought or prayed to God. But what we hear is someone who is lifting up a cry to the Lord, someone who is asking a big question, a big life question. And so the psalmist says this in verse 10, "We live at best to be 70 years old, maybe 80 if we're strong, but their duration brings hard work and trouble because they go by so quickly. And then we fly off. Who can comprehend the power of your anger? The honor that is due you corresponds to your wrath." And then this line in verse 12, "Teach us to number our days so that we can have a wise heart." Teach us would mean that we must learn how to number our days. Because we count a lot of things naturally. We count how much money is in our bank account or how much there isn't. We count our friends or our followers on social media. We count how many errands we have to run any given day. But are we really stopping to number our days, to pay attention to each day? To number your days is to make every day count. And what happens, as it is explained to us in Psalm 90, is that when you number your days, you gain a wise heart. And I think a wise heart is a generous one. Numbering your days is, in fact, the gateway to generosity, to freely giving and sharing your time. So why number your days? Why would this even matter? We'll look at two places in the New Testament. The first in James chapter 4, where we learn two things. One is that time is brief and that time is uncertain. In James chapter 4, verses 13 through 15, we hear, "Pay attention, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a town. We will stay there a year, buying, selling, and making profit.' But get this, you don't really know about tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears only for a short while before it vanishes. And here's a suggestion to us about time. Here's what you ought to say. If the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. Time is brief. James calls it a mist that appears and then vanishes. Time is uncertain. We don't know what tomorrow brings. And so our best approach to life and to time is to begin our intentions with, if the Lord wills. If it be God's will, then I will go do this or that. You see, there's two kinds of time in the New Testament. There's chronos and kairos. Chronos is a specific amount of time, like an hour or a day, an appointed time. Kairos, on the other hand, refers to the time for God's purpose, a time where God will act. Kairos is the Lord's time. Which is why in 2 Peter 3:8, we hear, don't let it escape your notice, dear friends, that with the Lord a single day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a single day. Chronos and kairos. Jesus numbered his days. Jesus lived with the real notion that his time on earth, his earthly life, was brief. And so, that's why he lived with an awareness that he needed to make the most of each day, the most of his time. So Jesus predicted his own death and resurrection, and he used the number 3. And we see that appear several other times in the Gospels. That after 3 days, Jesus would rise. He was counting those or numbering those days. Leading up to that, in the Passion story, Peter denied Jesus 3 times after wanting to build 3 shelters at the Transfiguration. When Jesus was on the cross, people mocked him about how he would predicting that he could rebuild the temple in 3 days. For 3 hours, when Jesus was upon the cross, the earth fell dark. And at what time did Jesus give up his spirit? 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But 3 days later, he rose. Jesus numbered his days. We can live into the fullness of each day and each moment as we too number our days, making each day count. I asked a similar question to our confirmands, this being Confirmation Sunday. When they were on their retreat, they had an opportunity to write or respond to how they share their gifts, how they express generosity and generosity of time in their lives. Kyle talked about a time when he went with his baseball team to our local homeless veterans center near the church. That they started outside doing some cleanup around the house, and they noticed a veteran with his son. They introduced themselves, and they started playing with the son, and they really hit it off until the time that they were done, and they had such a good time, nobody wanted to leave. And Kyle said, I knew that of all we had done, we were helping this little boy and many other people, and that made me smile. Jack talked about serving with other students at Feed My Starving Children and how great it felt to help and impact all those families whose lives would benefit by the food that they helped prepare. Jack said, when you help, you don't need anything in return because you already get the feeling of accomplishment, the feeling you helped others. Ella talked about the last few days of her 8th grade year, how she also went to Feed My Starving Children. And she remembers distinctly when everyone in the warehouse gathered around to pray over the food. She said, you should help everyone, even if it doesn't help you. Emma talked about a time when her family bought presents for people not as fortunate as them, and they did it anonymously and took it to school. And it was fun picking out the clothing and the toys for others, but it didn't measure up, she says, to seeing some kids wearing those outfits and clothes, even if they didn't know it was from us. Jules talked about Sleepout Saturday, part of the Bridge Communities Ministry, an opportunity where people voluntarily sleep outside to understand what other people have to experience when they're going through homelessness or housing transition. She said the first time she slept in a tent with some friends, the next time she slept in a car, but this year she's going to sleep in a cardboard box in her backyard. She said she remembers the first time seeing someone do that, and she said, that is terrible. But then she came to the realization that it's terrible that real people have to experience that. The words of our confirmands give me hope for our future and for how they use their time, how they mark each day, number each day, and make each day count. Which reminds me of the story of a man named William Borden, another young man who grew up in the Chicago area. And his life can be summed up in the mantra or the slogan, no reserves, no retreats, and no regrets. This is William Borden, and he graduated from high school in 1905. When he graduated, he was already a very wealthy man. He was the heir to his family's fortune. And so for his graduation, his family, his parents sent him on a trip around the world to see and experience new and different things. But as Borden made his travels, something unexpected happened. They broke his heart. Seeing people around the world and how they suffered, the plight of so many people facing poverty and illness, caused him to reflect. So upon his return, he decided that he was going to become a missionary once he graduated college. So he attended Yale, and he was fully committed to making each day count. In fact, his freshman year, he started a Bible study, and he started meeting with a small group of men in this Bible study. What started as one group quickly grew, and by his senior year, there were 1,000 out of 1,300 students meeting in Bible study groups inspired by William Borden's group. He founded the Yale Hope Ministry. He would often be found late at night helping people who were on the street. This was a mission dedicated to assisting those dealing with alcoholism, to get them some care, to get them some form of support. His friends recall that it wasn't out of character to find William at 2 or 3 in the morning, helping to get someone into safe lodging, to get them a hot meal. Once he graduated Yale and did his graduate work at Princeton Seminary, he set sail for Egypt, where he was going to do some language training before reaching the destination of his missionary work in China. The same month that William Borden arrived in Egypt, he contracted spinal meningitis, and he died that same month. A life cut short at the age of 25. This story was taken back to America, and his biographer recounts that a wave of grief swept the nation as the story spread of this young man, this would-be missionary who gave so freely of his time, of his wealth for others, but he did it so naturally. He wasn't doing it in a way that he was seeking attention. When you look at William's life, and you see this truth manifested in a story that was told after his death, that in the back of his Bible, at each key decision in his life, he wrote something down. When he decided to become a missionary, he wrote, "No reserves." When he decided to not take high-paying jobs after college, but instead to fulfill his calling, he wrote, "No retreats." And then right before he died, in the back of his Bible, he wrote, "No regrets." You could say that William Borden didn't fulfill his dream. He didn't fulfill his mission. But you could also look and say, when you see what he did in the way that, though his dream was to go to distant places to share the good news of Jesus, he actually impacted those around him, those immediately around him, in profound ways. So you could say instead that he did fulfill his mission, that he made the most of the time that he had. But for us, to be able to do that, we have to think about something that is uncomfortable. We have to ponder our own mortality. The fact that tomorrow isn't promised to any of us. You see, when we can live with an awareness of our own death, that our time will come to an end, we can live with the clarity of purpose. It's been said that if we truly understand how to die, we will learn how to live. And if we learn how to live, we will understand how to die, to make the most of our lives. So I want to encourage you today to number your days. I was thinking of this as I was gathered with one of the saints of this church just the other day. And she's on hospice care now. I was sitting beside her, and she could recognize me, though wasn't fully responsive. I read some scripture, and we prayed, and it reminded me of the fragility of life. When I left there, I was fully conscious of this concept of numbering my days, of making each day count. So I want to invite you to do the same. I want you not to count down, but to count up the days that you have been blessed with on this earth, to make the most of each day, committing to share your time generously with others, to number your days, to count the moments, to give thanks to God that you have life, that you have breath, that you have people to care for. So I want to close today with this question. How will you use the time left in front of you? Will you number your days? Will you make each day count? Because I believe that the way you answer that question, how you live into that question, will determine how you experience the rest of your life. That answer can make all the difference for all of your time left, for all of your days ahead, all of the days with which you are blessed. Amen.